Welcome to Gin and Tantra, spirituality with a twist. The podcast that takes Tantrism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, Kabbalism, shamanism, Chinese medicinism, and all of the other isms we've been influenced by, and blends them into a tall, crisp, cool cocktail your spirit has been longing for.
I want you to get together.
Now, isn't that refreshing?
I want you to get together.
Thanks for tuning in to Gin and Tantra. As always, please like, subscribe, and share. In today's episode, we talk about the role of society and sexuality, trauma and openness, the Kabbalist Bread of Shame, Jiminy Cricket, the fine line between innocence and naiveté, the role of spirituality and love and sexuality, sexually charged places and responsibility, and using curiosity as a passion for experience. Enjoy the episode.
Hey, fellow Gianteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we're doing kind of a different kind of an episode. It's a little bit of a commentary on our last episode with the wonderful Lady India that y'all can check out. And it's a little bit of, I know it's personal for me. I will see how personal it is for you, Daniel, but it's kind of acknowledging that we're kind of heading into like a different part of what we're going to be maybe talking about in our little podcast project in an interesting way. And, you know, the funny thing for me, Daniel, is it's kind of driven mostly by, you know, our female guests who've come on and talked about this. And really, you know, it really came out of the conversation with Lady India, especially that, you know, this thing to talk about like sex positivity, which is a big subject matter. And I don't want to define it like too tight, you know, because I think if you define it too strictly, you'll kind of miss parts of it.
Right.
You know?
I agree.
But the idea that certainly, you know, sexuality is a healing thing, especially for those who have been through sexual trauma, overcoming sexual repression, you know, within the culture. I kind of like the two things that certainly come to mind for me, like right off the bat. Do you got anything else that you would want to add to that?
No, I think that's about right. I mean, this culture is sort of puritanical in its essence, right? In its origins. And the repression was present from the beginning. And we are sort of consistently working through various layers of that repression or oppression, depending on which side of the coin you're standing on, you know? And this part is absolutely a huge one, actually. And it reverberates all throughout everything that we do. So, you know, I mean, and it's even in the popular culture stuff, where you have a whole group of people, right? Incels. Right? People who are involuntarily celibate, who then, you know, we're not going to go too deep into it, but from just like kind of a psychological perspective, you could say, okay, where is all that energy going? Right? Where is all that energy going?
4chan kind of stuff and hostility.
You know, that's what and this is, you know, and so we, you know, think about all the times in history where they told the young people not to relieve themselves in that fashion. It's to build up all of this energy. And then what do you do with it? You put it towards some end. And I guess if you're a monk or something like that, you're putting it towards your spiritual, your religious practice. That's okay. But in society, if you got a lot of this energy floating around and you don't have good intentions, that's not okay, actually.
Well, it'll build up and just create a lot of, like, in Chinese medicine, you'd say it like messes up the wood phase, which always sounds like it's a little bit of a pun when you're talking about young men, but it messes up the wood phase, and, you know, you get a lot of anger. And it just gets directed in all kinds of chaotic ways. The thing that was really fascinating about the, you know, because I have done the pre-interview things for a last couple of our guests. You know, Keith Brewer, who was on, you know, Lady India, who was on, and in the Lady India thing, it was her impetus that really said, like, I want to talk about sex positivity in this thing. And I was like, oh, interesting. You know, so you can listen to the episode, but the point that she really wanted to make, and, you know, she was extremely honest in how she talked about things. And I'll talk about that more in a second, because we really had just this amazingly honest guests on. But, you know, she was, as part of it, she was saying, well, yeah, like I'm healing from very specific sexual trauma. And, you know, you can listen to the episode to hear how she describes that in her own words. I won't try to like put words in her mouth to describe that. but she said, like, I want to talk about the fact that, you know, you can heal from these things, you know. And she also even wanted to talk about her experience in the goth culture and, you know, subdom kind of cultural things as like tools of healing. She's like, I want to make that point. And I was like, okay, cool. I mean, that's all over. That's exactly in line with what we want to do here. But it really came from her. And then I had another experience of a guest that we're going to have on in the near future. It'll just take a little prep work. She is traveling now, Anya Gramone. She is another person in the TCM world, and a fellow grad school person of mine back in the day when we were in grad school together. And her work involves really helping women deal with sexual trauma, sexual repression, and helping them refine their own sexuality. I mean, it's her whole work now, which actually, to be honest, we fell out of touch for a bit and I didn't realize she was doing that. And when I realized she was doing that, I was like, we have to come on this podcast. And she and I got together and we talked for 3 hours about aspects of this. And I was like, well, this is a whole thing to have on. So it was interesting for me because it really is something that, you know, we haven't done for a show that has Tantra in the name. We've been very chaste how we've handled this, right? I think because we talked about in the beginning, and it's episodes and episodes ago since we talked about this, just because we wanted to make sure that we were doing the Tantra spiritual part justice before we just talked about the sexy stuff. You know, it was us establishing kind of a base point to talk about things, making sure that it was a spiritual place that we were talking from, rather than just like, I don't know, what would you do? Talk about oral sex for like 20 minutes and then you say you did an episode on Tantra? Is that how it works?
I think that's how it works. That's how it goes. You got
Let's talk about anal sex for half an hour and then we'll call it Tantra, which there's nothing wrong with listening to people talk about anal sex for half an hour. That's perfectly delightful.
Yeah. If you
and
like,
we'll probably have that episode at some point. But we want to make sure that we talked about the Tantra from a legit, you know, a legit place before we just went talking about things that were specifically sexual. But it really seems like the Buddhist dakinis and goddesses are speaking, saying, hey, it's time to talk this way. So I look at it as kind of like another phase of us getting to this place. And I was kind of thinking about that too, you know, that was probably time for us to start doing that. So it looks like things have come together, so to speak. It's a pun. And so there it is, which also I think gets us to a place of talking maybe very honestly about things, and maybe honestly about things that are kind of personal. You and I were talking in the pre-meeting thing that we do, you know, before we record an episode, that we've tried to be honest like the whole time. We've tried to be authentic. That's part of the goal of this whole thing, to talk about these spiritual things in honest and authentic ways. But I think once you start talking about things that have like sexuality involved, you just get into a different place where you have to talk about other kinds of things in more honest and more personal ways. I know. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, we're not trying to be honest. We are honest, you know.
Yeah.
That I think that's the key, is that it's not effort. It's just kind of who we are. And a big part of what we're doing is just, you know, we're trying to share, but and from different perspectives, right? You're trying to share from a particular book or a teaching, right? From a tradition. And then we're trying to share from experience. But I don't think that I can speak for myself. If I'm sharing from an experience, I'm sharing from an experience as a person, not sharing from an experience as something that I have read or heard and I'm passing it forward in like a lecture style type of a thing. It's more like me as a being who has these experiences is sharing this to other people. Maybe you might have this experience, or I've seen it enough times to say that, ooh, that might be a kind of a thing, because I've seen it so many times at this point, but it's certainly not from anything other than authenticity, right? Which is a word.
Yeah, I think that's like the big word. I think the authenticity word is really important for both of us, because that was the goal of setting this thing up in the beginning. We had certain things we knew we wanted to do. I wanted to bitch about society every week, and I just did it again.
Congrats.
We wanted to talk authentically about what it means to try to like live this kind of life, you know, in this time, in this place, right?
Yeah.
And that only can come from like an authentic place.
Correct.
But, you know, it is weird, like, okay, so from a very personal point of view, I was like, you know, I got my professional life outside of doing this fun project that we're doing, right? And I enjoy the hell out of doing this. I've learned so much doing it, but, you know, I got my other parts of my life. And like, it was what this weird question of like, to what extent am I going to talk about honestly about all kinds of different things? You know, I I think everything we talk about authentically, but it's a question of what do you want to talk about, you know? And I think the minute you start talking about things that have more to do with sexuality, it's one of these sort of interesting subject matters where you're like, okay, there's things we can say. Are we going to start talking this way or not? And will people necessarily understand that? I guess we'll go through more of that as we go. But, you know, what struck me, especially after the Lady India episode, but we've had other guests on too, you know, especially I think Joni Osborne. Those episodes are certainly worth listening to as well from this point of view, where people came on and they talked really, really honestly about things that were extremely difficult. Now we've done that too, but, you know, like people coming on, like, and, you know, with Lady India, you could kind of see, and she talked about it a little bit beforehand, before we started, like, she was like, I'm a little nervous about this, you know,
Yeah.
like when am I going to talk about all of this? And she and I did, again, the pre-episode prep work, right? And there were things she was saying, and I was like, do you want to talk about that? Are you sure you want to talk about that? And she was like, yeah, you know, eventually. She said, I'll decide when I get to it. And, you know, it was sort of the flow between the two of us doing the prep work beforehand. But then, you know, when we got on the show, she talked about most of the things that she said she wanted to talk about, even those things that felt risky. And I couldn't help but feeling this, and I don't know how you feel about this, Daniel, but I couldn't help feeling like, if people are going to come on and be this honest with us, then I felt this feeling like I got to meet their level.
Sure.
I got to come back and try to be as open and honest in the way back as I can. Right. And I felt like it would be hypocritical to not try to do the same on some level. You know, if that makes sense to you, I know how you feel about that.
Yeah. I mean,
I really thought about that really deep in the last like couple of weeks. Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm there, you know, like I feel like I'm there all the time when we're doing this in particular. So if the moment comes for like that kind of sharing, then I just step into it. And, you know, we're conscious about what we say, right? This is a little behind the scenes, right? For those who are listening, or for those who are viewing, because we are now, we're popping the videos up. So, you know, what's up to the video crowd? We will have everything on YouTube as well as Spotify. So for those who don't have Spotify, totally cool. We actually have a good portion of our listeners through Apple. So we'll post things on YouTube as well for people. But, you know, we're conscious about what we say in terms of being measured and, you know, trying to be sensitive about what we're, you know, how we say things.
Thoughtful, considerate.
Considerate. I'm not trying not to swear, but I'm also not avoiding it. If I say, oh shit, you know, like they're, you know, right. It's not a big deal.
If
right.
It happens.
It happens. Right. So we're being considerate. And I think in some of that consideration is when people come on and they're very open and they're sharing their story, that I have shared a lot of my story, as has Eric, you know, throughout over the time that we've been doing this. This is another level of that for people who haven't done it. And so I try to consciously know that we're going to go there and I want to meet them there, just like you have said.
I think like there's an interesting like psycho-spiritual phenomenon here where, you know, like one person's honesty and sincerity and openness will tend to trigger the same thing back in other people, all things being equal, unless there's something really wrong with the other person. But, you know, in general, it's probably like some oxytocin thing or something. Probably something even happens. You probably could measure what it is, you know, neurochemically or in the person's, you know, channels. And and if you want to go more like Asian, right? Like something happens and people feel, you know, like you'll feel this like, okay, I'm going to be authentic and open in the way that meets where this person is coming from. Yeah. It's probably part of like, you know, from my psych background thing, it's probably part of the Carl Rogers thing that I bring up periodically in the podcast. Just this idea, if you're open and authentic with people, probably they'll find that place inside themselves too, which I think is what's been happening. Actually, I thought about that with the Lady India episode. I felt like, okay, she and I talked really, really honest, and it opened up a space to do that. And then she came on, she felt comfortable with the two of us talking, right? And, you know, she went to these places. So I felt like, but yeah, so I was again thinking seriously. I thought, well, if you know, people are going to come on and do this thing as honest as Joni Osborne has been, or as honest as Lady India has been, I'm like, well, I mean, but make sure I do this for everybody. Even I was thinking back to like having Robert Thurman on, and you know, he left his first marriage and had to travel to India. That's tough shit to talk about. That's not easy. Right?
No, I mean, my mom.
You know, your mom talked very honest. Yeah.
You know, about immigrating and.
Yeah. having to like go on her own journey of finding herself, and sometimes being in conflict with people, in the family, right?
Yeah. And Todd, there's so many people who've been on,
Oh yeah. That's true. So it's this thing of trying to do this. And I mean, I guess in this episode, because I know that I have, students and patients who listen to this thing, and as you do too, Daniel. And I couldn't help but thinking, even from the point of view of like my other work, there's as I was writing this episode up, I was thinking, there's a point I'm trying to make here, which is like, if you can share some of yourself in a way that's what you're saying, right? That's measured in the correct way. You know what I mean? Yeah. It does make a difference in how a patient will respond or how a student will respond. People realize, oh, this is a person I can talk honestly with.
Correct.
You'll get an honest response back. So,
and I don't know that like that is necessarily looked kindly upon in the medical traditions, actually.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not.
I don't think, I don't remember, we obviously, there's plenty of lectures in school about how to interact with patients and listening and, things like this, but sharing is not something that I remember. And Eric, you're still teaching. I stopped the last semester. That I remember anybody mentioning one way or another about, and definitely people saying like, be careful.
I do it in some of the classes I teach where it's specifically psychological.
Okay.
Because you can talk about relationships between clinicians and patients, and they can go wrong in various ways.
Sure.
But part of the ways it can go wrong is the clinician can feel overly cut off, or the clinicians can look hostile too.
Yeah.
So they call this like a countertransference, how a doctor acts towards a patient. It's like a little bit of psych jargon, like a transference is how the patient feels about the clinician. Countertransference is how the clinician feels about the patient. And so sometimes I've certainly been with doctors who seem hostile, like this person doesn't even seem to like me. why am I here? Like, do they really want to help me? I can't even tell, because they read hostile, or they can read cut off and distant. Cold. And then it's very hard to connect, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is part of it. And I know I got that from, again, I would go back to the humanistic psych. That was sort of my thing before I went into our field. But, I think like in your life overall, whether, you're doing your professional work or even with people within your family and stuff, if you present a vibe of being open and authentic, you'll probably get the same response from your kids to some extent, right? Yeah. And your loved ones and family members, significant other, or whoever, right? And others. Yeah.
That, and that goes into like everyday experiences too, right? I'm sort of having like a moment of insight, where I'll see somebody listening to us, and they're getting their drink from whatever coffee shop. We're not going to shill for any places, right? You know what I mean? But you're at your favorite,
the local coffee shop that's run by
that's
a small business person.
That's right.
That's struggling not to get driven out of business.
That's right. That hires only local employees and sources all organically and everything. But that like, I could see someone listening to us, right, in their little podcast, or maybe, somewhere in let's say Finland, and they're getting a scone. I don't even know if they
probably have scones, but
probably have
British,
scones, right? Scones are
a bit more British.
Scones are ubiquitous. It's okay.
Hankhammer. I just made up a Finnish word.
That's okay.
It's kind of a pastry.
But
I made up in my mind.
This is
we're doing the Finnish thing because we want to get somebody to invite us over to Finland.
Yeah, please take us.
It's supposed to be the happiest place on the planet.
That's right. So take me, please.
We want to be honorary citizens and get out of this crazy, fucked up country where we live.
Yeah, but that like you would remember at these moments to like be open, even with a clerk. And I'm not saying go to your clerk and say, hey, I had a wonderful urine this morning. It's like really amazing. Like, no, appropriate, consider it, but when you have interactions with people, that you're open in your greeting, you're open in your smile, you're open in your eyes, it's not just a simple transaction. Like, they're part of your experience as well. And so as you're open to them, you're open to other things. And so as people come on here, I'm open with you, you're open with me, they're open with us. It's just kind of a thing. And I hope that the people who listen and now watch feel that.
I think it like happened like, and again, I don't want to jerk the two of us off mutually.
Ooh.
But like the whole thing is like, even I think with the guests we had on who we don't know personally,
Yeah.
You know, like a Guy Newland or like a Dean Radin or like Robert Thurman or, you know, some of these other guests we've had on, you know, I think because, you know, we were talking honestly with them, I think we got honest responses in return.
Yeah.
So that's been part of the mission statement. But I do feel like a kind of a responsibility, and I felt this weird feeling. In the Kabbalah, they use this phrase called the bread of shame, which is a little dire sounding. So I don't know if I could use that phrase for this. But when you feel like you don't kind of do what you're supposed to do, you can feel the bread of shame.
Can you toast it?
No, it's not the kind of thing you want to put in your toaster.
Okay,
It'll make a terrible smell and turn out really bad. The bread of shame. You want to put some preserves on it. Yeah, it's not a scone, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Well,
It's not a finished scone.
Then I don't want it. Get it out of
in
here.
the toaster oven. Yeah, it's not something that's gonna make you one of the happiest people on the planet.
Okay.
As the Finns are apparently. No, it's one of these things where you know, you feel like you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and I just have been very conscious about this and the authenticity thing, which leads us to this. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Wouldn't they say that's your consciousness, like your Jiminy Cricket?
Oh yeah. Probably that's true.
Or
Yeah,
your conscience,
like the
conscience.
You could call it the bread of shame, or you can call it Jiminy Cricket. The one's a little bit more pleasant.
What did he say? And always let your conscience be your guide. What happened to
let
that?
the conscience be your guide.
What happened to those days?
There's a song. I can't remember the.
And always let your conscience be your guide.
Oh, is that what he says? Okay.
Yeah.
Or that's how he sings it. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
actually, Eric, that's a perfect replica. So we have to be careful that YouTube doesn't take that
down.
Like
take the video down
as a copyright infringement.
Disney's gonna just pull the video. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Because of and I'm sure
those 7 seconds.
Yeah, and the listeners are probably all crying just from that rendition of Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. So
yeah, they're all remembering back. They just flashed back. It was so rich and
yes, beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, which led to the part of the episode that has a little bit of a backstory to it, which was Daniel and I don't know what to call it, Daniel and Eric's nighttime adventure story. That you'll have to listen to the episode to hear. If you've already heard it, you've heard of it, but I'll kind of get to it as we go.
Yeah.
But again, I think it was triggered by Lady India's really incredible honesty in the episode. And you brought this thing up, and I couldn't help but thinking in the moment of it being just your response to kind of her honesty in the episode, that it led you to respond in this honest way. I don't know, does that resonate with you? Did it seem that way to you?
It just seemed to fit.
Okay.
We haven't really discussed it, and we were talking about sexuality and the healing, the various healing aspects in the cultures that she is kind of living in and living through, and her experience as an abuse victim, and all these various things kind of came up, and she was very open and honest talking about positive sexual, not experiences.
Her role is kind of as a dancer too.
Yes.
And
as a performer, and having performance art be healing, which definitely is.
With a kind of a sauciness to it too, right?
Yeah.
With the sexual aspect to it. Anyways, it's a story of Daniel and I going out to a, just if you haven't heard the last episode, it's a story of Daniel and I going on a little Buddhist tantric excursion.
Yes. Field trip
to a little bit of it's a very bougie little area in Lincoln Park where they have clubs and strip clubs and stuff. Yeah, I will explain the story as we go. The funny thing about it is,
for those who are not, this is located in Chicago, in
Chicago,
in the city proper.
And Lincoln Park is kind of a bougie neighborhood.
Yeah, we can go there.
It's definitely
there's Lululemons every quarter mile, so I think we're
for sure. Yeah, the highest per capita of Lululemons, and rivaling any other city on the planet.
Oh, beautiful.
Any other neighboring city. But it was a story that we had recorded before spontaneously, and I had made the choice to edit it out, because of just wanting again, I think it has something to do with talking about things that have to do with aspects of sexuality and making sure that they're going to be understood, especially as it relates back to the tantras. So it was something that we had kind of done a longer conversation on, and then retrospectively I was I don't know if I want to do that, and we took it out of one of the previous episodes. And then Daniel, being Daniel, just jumped into this thing again. I was fucking Daniel. No, Daniel, now he was right in the moment. It was the right thing for sure. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's partially like, him feeling the honesty of what's happening and partially feeling that it fit the context for sure. So we went there again. And then again, I was like, do I want to talk about this thing? So we were sending texts like back and forth over the last day and a half or something like that, going like, do I want to do this? But it also like, again, I think that's why I was thinking like, it's something about presenting an honesty and an openness about Tantra, about sexuality, spirituality, and just about, I guess, like authenticity in a way that like, I hopefully communicates to listeners and in a way that I hope also is the way I am with students and patients. So I thought, well, I should probably do this, leave this episode up. Though Daniel and I did have a conversation about like, oh, should we like edit that part out? Ultimately, my deciding no. But I'm gonna try to like give context of the whole story because it kind of came up out of the blue and the lady in the episode. So I thought, well, okay, let's talk through it so we can set a little bit more of an understanding of what it was about, because it does deserve some context. So there is this thing in the tantras of visiting sort of more highly charged sexual places in practice, right? It does come up as a thing. It's specifically in some of the tantras that I have like I practice and have empowerments in and things like that. Now, this is a weird subject matter too. I didn't put it in notes, but it occurred to me it's worthwhile talking about, where there are parts of like Tantra that you're really not supposed to talk about. They sometimes call it secret mantra in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And as I was thinking about this, Daniel, I thought, there are things that are private and secret that I wouldn't talk about, and that's a kind of an interesting question of what would you talk about and what would you not talk about? You know what I'm saying?
I know, I totally get it. I mean, I think that's for anybody,
Yeah.
like you could be sharing things and then what's the line? Where there's a line somewhere, and it's not that it's not that you're hiding. It's just that like what's appropriate, because I think part of that, at least from my interpretation of some of the secret stuff, is that it's context. If someone doesn't have the context to understand the profundity to which you might be expressing,
that's like there's an acknowledgement that like in these practices, which can be a little bit more outside the box, people might not get what you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah. And they might not understand like what the role is of that particular practice or that particular thing that you're doing.
Right. And so you have to have
some of it's defensive. I think some of it is like, it's not going to be understood. So don't go showing it to too many people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it will be misunderstood and maybe some of the reactions will be hostile.
And this, I think this goes even for like, again, just regular people. When you have some sort of technical skill or you have some kind of awareness on a topic, if you were to share some tiny detail with somebody else, they wouldn't understand it at all. So they have to
that's true.
You have to kind of have this thing, where you can both speak a common language.
Yeah. And okay, so it's like that, like you might have some medical expertise in like an area like we have, and you're like, you try to explain it and people look like, what is this dude talking about?
They're like, no, tell me what I need to know. Just tell me, Yeah.
But this is like interesting because it does have to do with things that there's no doubt in the Buddhist tantras and in Tantra in general, there's this question of things that are kind of potentially a little bit to the society at large may appear taboo on some level, or might have taboos associated with them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those taboos are violated kind of purposely, like to go like, okay, we're not going to acknowledge this taboo. We're going to break this taboo. I was talking with somebody yesterday about this, and there's this, the famous ritual of the 5 M's, and people break taboos. They're physically intimate with someone outside their caste. Major taboo in that culture, right? You eat a cow, major taboo in that culture, and there's times when the tantras talk about like that kind of a thing, that you'll be doing something that like might be experienced by other people as being taboo, and on a relative level, what I mean? Of course there are taboos that are taboo for a reason, but there are other taboos that are probably just more like culturally relevant, right? So it's kind of a weird question, I do know that there are like meditative practices that are supposed to be only like, only supposed to talk about them if you also have that practice. And so I probably wouldn't talk about those things in any of these episodes. I'll save for other subjects that we can talk about, right? And that's kind of like also like probably a respect for the teachers that pass those things on to me.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be respectful to like Rinpoche, or, you know, especially, you know, who, you know, presented so much great stuff to me. And, you know, something he said like shouldn't be talked about, then you won't talk about it, right? That was like, yeah, thinking about that whole issue is pretty interesting. And I think you're right. There's a general aspect to it too. I know there are things that people have told me in confidence where they've said like, don't ever tell anybody for the rest of your life, and I will die not saying those things.
Right.
You know, I mean, I can think of things off the top of my head, like right now, where the person said, I'm only telling you, don't ever say this to anybody else.
And vice versa. Right.
Yeah.
But this harkens
I'm a little
back
bit more of a chatty person in my own life. So
but this harkens back to that sort of resonance of openness, right? That you provide the same space that you want to be held in by being open, right? And supportive in that way. And then someone else does the same. And then once this kind of bridge is created, you know, good things happen, because then you could share more deeply. You can move beyond the superficiality of like, you know, I farted in the elevator, you know.
Yeah, that's no big whoop.
No, I try every time to get an elevator to do that, by the way.
I think, I think that there's like, if I look at it honestly, you know, and again, we're having our moments of honesty, probably my baseline fear state is to be not understood by the society at large, because I'm like suspicious of it, and not wrongly so on some level. I was talking with a patient of mine about doing this episode. She's a patient I've known for a long time. And, you know, we talk about different things. And again, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. I talk honestly about things in my life, and it kind of helps her be open and honest back with me. So I was telling her about this, and she was really like, don't talk about any of this, you know? And she was saying like, she described me as being naive. And I was like, how so? And she said, well, you know, you have this kind of like innocence about you where you don't want to see the worst in people and things. And I was like, maybe that's true, you know? But she said like, you'll talk about things and you're not thinking about like what malicious people will do with the things that you say. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm like that. Maybe I'm not, I don't know. But she was concerned about me.
Well, I think
I think the clash is usually for me, like something has to do with like, again, this is my own psychology, so I'm just being honest about it. It's like, am I going to be societally misunderstood?
Okay.
Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that the caution is innocence versus naiveté, right? And then the other part is being heard, is how well are you heard? You know, like how does it land? So I think innocence is good because it shows a willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think that's like part of what we're trying to do here.
For sure. But the naivete part is for either intentionally or unintentionally not viewing the entire picture. And we're not doing that.
That's what she's afraid of.
Right. But but I mean, you know.
Anyways.
Yeah.
But some of this stuff is very interesting because I'm thinking about like what you share and don't share and what will be understood or not understood. I have had the thought, you know, the Dalai Lama's here. And if you think about the Dalai Lama, everyone, like, you know, not everyone, but most people probably have a pretty good vibe about the Dalai Lama. You feel good about him, you know. And it has occurred to me like the tradition that he's representing, this Buddhist Tantra tradition, is full of all kinds of iconography and stuff that's like way outside the box, right? If you just did like the most cursory search on like Tibetan Buddhist art and imagery, you know, like from a conservative American perspective, you'd be like, what the hell is this? You'd think it's demon worship or something easily, right? Easily. And I thought, you know, that's amazing that like there's no backlash against this. No one comes up and like says, you know, why do you have this weird image of a Buddha that has the head of a buffalo and these giant horns and an erect penis with like a red glans?
You're reading
like,
my mind.
What is going on? He has like, he's armed to the teeth with all of these 36 arms of weapons. What the hell is this?
Yeah.
Right?
Why is he wearing his wife in a hat? You know?
Why does he have the cut off head of Rama hanging from his belt?
That's right.
Like, what is this? You know, a head of skulls and, you know, like all this stuff. And like, yeah, you'd think it was like some kind of demon worship. It's not.
It's not.
But, you know, it's one of those things where you realize like, yeah, a lot of this stuff could be easily misunderstood. Yeah. So anyways, go into the whole thing, there is this idea of going to these places where just a lot of like sexually charged energy. And it's always kind of been there in the traditions. And when I was talking with my patient yesterday, I was like, I have this desire to do things to make this real. I want to do this in the real way. So if they talk about doing that, I want my Tantra to be real. And that is in no way criticizing other people who practice in whatever their ways are. I want to make that absolutely clear. People like seem to do this in all kinds of ways, what suits their personality, what suits their life, what suits, how they think about this. And there is absolutely no judgment in any of that at all. But I know for me, I was like, I want to do this for reals. And this is part of what's talked about. And, there's kind of classic tantric stories of this. Tolopa is a really good example of this, one of the great sort of tantric practitioners of India, who was instructed to go work as like the doorman in a brothel. And you're like, well, what's that story about? And the point is supposed to be something like, when you really like read deeper into it, it was partially being in these highly sexually charged places, but it was also, he was kind of a Brahmin. He was a very conservative person, raised with all these ideas of purity. And, like what you would have in the Brahmin kind of caste, like in India, all this propriety and rules and purities and bathing rituals and everything has to be done in this completely pure way. So as part of his, what, like the person who was teaching him said, like, you got to go work here and something where you're not going to be in this pure environment. So you can get over this idea, that you have to be in this pristine, pure environment or you're all like bothered by it. You know what I mean? It was sort of something like even like that. So there's all kinds of like sort of backstories like this of people doing this. And I thought, well, okay, well, this is part of the tradition. I want to do this for reals. I don't want to just, have it be something that sits in the book that I don't like see what it is. Does that make sense what I'm saying there, Daniel?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, to me anyways, if it makes total sense to you, then, that's good. And, for our audience, we always like to get feedback from everybody. So if you, feel like this is an interesting topic, hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. I feel like we're doing a live thing, but it's not live, it's recorded. But, for sure, we love the feedback.
We'd love the feedback right now. I'd like to hear what people have to say.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, to your point, these ideas are far outside of what people are used to in terms of just, societally driven life potentials,
Probably what people think of like religion and spirituality too.
For sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And so when things are presented like this, it's like, what?
Yeah.
And that was the reason they were presented. That's the reason why they were taught, is to get someone to go, wait, what? And sort of change their perspective.
Yeah, change the perspective. So for me, I can say on a very like personal level with this, I've always been really interested and I wanted to understand the connections between sexuality, love, relationship, and spirituality. That's always been a point of like interest for me, like the whole way through. It took me a while to kind of get to this Buddhist Tantra as a way of trying to like fully explore that. But even back in my early Zen days, when I was really training my Zen really intensely, there was, and it was still part of my thought process. And there's like not a lot of sexuality in Zen, almost at all. But I felt like even at that time, I thought, no, there should be something about this here. Even back then I had those thoughts. And it's sort of been a part of my thinking, like almost like the whole time. I know you and I in different episodes have talked about, both of us at times considered maybe even being monastics, like kind of like giving up the world and giving up relationship, love, sexuality, those things. Like it crossed both of our minds at different points in our lives, right? But I remember even when I was thinking, I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Even though I do want to do my best to spiritually progress myself as much as I can, I probably could do that in one of these monastic settings. I had thought about going off to Japan, maybe trying to become a Zen monk or something like that in my 20s. But I thought, no, I think there's some meaning to love, relationship, sexuality, these things. I want to understand this. I had some part of me that like just thought there was a truth in that and wanted to explore and know that in the course of my life. So I sort of always have felt that way, and I think like when Lama Glenn H. Mullen, he says something like, I'm probably not quoting him exact, he probably said this in some teaching or some, empowerment or something like that, some Buddhist tantric event, where he just said, like, a Buddha who doesn't understand the spiritual meaning of all parts of life would not be a complete Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, yeah, there's a truth in that, and I know in hearing that, when he said it, I was like, I think I completely agree with that. I think that's probably how I felt like all the time, that I had this intuition that there was a deeper meaning and connection between these things that, wasn't being talked about in the spiritualities that I was being exposed to, but that I wanted to understand. And you vibe with that too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely felt that there was like a spiritual meaning to sexuality and love in a way that I really wanted to understand in this life, at least potentially. At least I felt that way. Again, that's no judgments against people who would take a monastic path or anything like that. It's just a personal statement, about what spoke to me.
It makes the path harder and easier at the same time.
I think that makes sense.
Easier, at least from my perspective, easier because you're not doing the monastic thing, and it's not held to some pedestal like, well, if you don't do that, then you have no chance, right? But then harder because then you're like, okay, if someone's going to make real progress, they got to make real progress while being a regular person.
Yeah.
And that's hard because essentially I don't know how it is for you, but for me, man, I do try, but there's situations every day I'm like, I could have done that better. I definitely could have done that every day. I'm like, I could have did that better. Well, and I don't beat myself up over it, but it's like, that came out wrong. I pulled the trigger too quick with that emotion in that spot, and it wasn't right. Oh, the tone of my voice didn't match what I really wanted to say, or I wasn't as open in that moment as I could have been. And had I done that, maybe I would have got the response I actually wanted, instead of having to work backwards. And this is highlighted best in our intimate relationships, the people who we're closest with, loved ones, good friends, right? I mean, we love our friends too, but the close relationships, the space is so much smaller, so much shorter.
I was thinking about this yesterday and prepping for this, and I felt like, because there is this kind of practice where you look at yourself with that critical eye.
Yeah.
Not in a morbidly so, in a way like you're going to like beat yourself up about things, flagellate yourself or something, what I mean? But like in a way that like you look at yourself honestly.
Yeah.
And like when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, as far as like major fuck ups and life faux pas, I've gotten a lot better.
Good.
When I really think about the big ones, like, I fucked that up. That has gotten significantly better over the course of my whole spiritual life. Like those things I don't have. So now I do feel like it's more like these little tinier things. Yeah. I had the exact same thought yesterday. It's like, well, I probably could have been a little bit less like harsh on my son. I had to scold him about this thing that he was doing or whatever. It's like little things like that, which are relatively kind of like tinier, compared to things where like, oh, I really screwed up that one.
Right.
That I don't do. At least to my own standards. Other people might say, no, dude, you screw things up all the time. They might feel that
yeah,
way.
dude, what are you talking about?
but I don't. I don't, for myself. And I look pretty critically at myself. So yeah. So So I think on the sexuality aspect of this, since we're going into this new area, I thought we would probably do the other part that occurred to me too. Let me say it like this. And I think it will lead to other episodes, is I was also interested in what like it meant to have a healthy version of sexuality, love, and relationship. That was important to me too. I had like this underlying idea, like I want to know what like real health is, like what's psychologically, psychospiritually healthy in sexuality, love, and relationship. Because I definitely felt growing up where I was, in the places that the people I was exposed to, the places I was exposed to, it wasn't happening. Like that was very clear to me, to my own mind. Now again, I don't want to like foist things on other people that they don't.
Sure.
But for me, I was definitely like, no, this is not right. This is, and I grew up in like what would you call it? Like probably like Trump's America would be a way to describe it. For people who would know where I was from, you could certainly describe it that way. And it's looked messed up to me, and we had the author George Saunders, who I occasionally have pen palled with over the last year or something like that, and we grew up on the same street, and And he talks about this, like, it's funny because he was writing me and he said, like, the way he saw our environment was people who either were living lives of quiet desperation or manic happy drinking. He saw those two types of people. And I was like, yeah, that covers a decent percentage of the range of people. Either like people who were quietly desperate, like kind of like life eating them away, or people who were acting out in these crazy manic ways, right? And like I was just like, well, this isn't right somehow. Like I knew this was all not. So I definitely had this idea, like I want to know what psychological health would mean around all kinds of parts of life, but especially things that had to do with like sexuality, love, and relationship. I know how you feel about that. Was that something that had crossed your mind back in the day when you were younger?
No.
Just no.
I never thought about it.
How about now that you're older?
I would say since, in the last few years, I would say more in the last probably 6 or 7 years. I think relationship was something that I didn't take for granted, but it was a given, which I'm fortunate that that's the case, right? Some people, it's much harder. But for me, relationship was a given, that it's going to be with somebody or multiple people or whomever, it's going to be happening. And so just it's a race to the end, and someone will be there with you, at some point.
So you're just thinking like it was kind of like I'll have different relationships with different people, and eventually the right person will find each other. There'll be like a sort of like a selection process will happen, and we'll find the right partner ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But then as time has gone on, and you and I have been having conversations, and I've had some experiences that like the interplay of energies between people has been healing in different ways. And probably this is a lot to do with me being being a practitioner, is that I realize that sometimes some people resonate so well with me that it probably doesn't have anything to do with what's in my mind. Actually, it has to do with just me as a being, me as Daniel, for my heart or my spirit, whatever you want to call it. And I'm realizing that if I'm affecting others that way, because I'll say the same jokes to different people, or I try, I don't, not intentionally, but just my sense of humor.
Sure. It happens, right?
But for some people, it's taken very well. And other people, it's like dead stare, they call it dead ass. You're just like a blank face, right? And so I'm just kind of recognizing that. And then simultaneously, I'm like, well, if I'm having this effect on others, then for sure others are having that effect on me. And you start to be more selective, intentionally, consciously about who and how you spend your time, right? And the people that I've sort of interacted with have had, various levels of I hate to say, I don't want to use this word, but penetration, in my, in my life,
You've been penetrated in various ways.
Yeah. But that's it's a given. But you realize that like there's a healing and a learning potential based on the various interactions that we have with anybody and everybody, and the relationships that we hold closer to our heart. Those interactions are even deeper. They penetrate even more deeply,
which is always satisfying. I think that so I guess we'll see what happens when we talk about the psychology episodes of this, and we'll get your reactions. This is kind of interesting, because I guess I was interested in like the forms of relationship too, or something like that, but we'll kick it around. But I do hear what you're saying. Some of that I think is like, we haven't talked too much about it, but some of that I think is even astrological.
Oh yeah.
Some people just vibe and you're like, wow, this person really affects me in some profound way. And then if you do know a little astrology, you can look back at it and go like, oh, well, no wonder there's so much resonance between me and this person. They just affect me, and sometimes that's really hard to even explain. It's not even something that they do in their personality. It might not even be something, if it's a romantic or love thing or sexual thing, it might even be exactly how they look, it's right. Something about like how they resonate with you. They bring something out of you that's kind of deep. I never will sell that experience short. That's a deep experience, right? You sort of wonder what the chart would be like between like Rumi and Shams of Tabriz or something like that. What would happen, what would their two charts look like? Probably resonated pretty deep. You say Shems or Shams?
Shems.
So all right, so going to sexually charged places, doubling back again. So some context. I wanted to talk about this part too, because it's probably the thing that makes me, I think is the most important to say. I had this conversation with my first love about sexuality, money, women, sex work. These kinds of questions came up. This is going back decades ago. I probably have had, I don't know how this is for you, Daniel. I probably had, like, in your life, you have maybe a handful of people that, you can say are people you transcendentally connect with on some level, sure. Right? And, certainly I had my first love, and we were together for a number of years, and it was this really deep thing between the two of us, and a pretty wicked astrological chart when you compare the two. But in any case, we were together for a long time. We're each other's first big loves. Okay. And this question came up. We were just strolling, ironically enough, around Lincoln Park, kind of not too far from where I live now. But we were strolling around, and it must have been like some movie we had watched or something. And she just asked me, would you ever like go and like sleep with a prostitute or something like that? And I wasn't thinking too deeply about it. I was just like, we were strolling and just randomly chatting, and it probably was triggered from some movie. It wasn't Pretty Woman. But she just asked me, and I think I just said like, well, maybe I'd be curious or something like that, and she got really mad at me. But not in the way you would think. It wasn't because of some jealousy or something like that. She really wasn't that kind of person. It was more that it triggered this argument. It wasn't even an argument. It was a strange thing. And if you have first loves and you argue with them, those arguments are really strange. Because we argued in this, in a way, but I didn't disagree with her about anything. We would manage to have arguments even when I agree with everything she was saying. But she laid out this thing for me that was very deep. What she really said was like, I think what she was criticizing in me is that my answer was too flippant, because I wasn't thinking about all the abuse that happens to women in the context of that kind of work. And so she was like, really, that's what upset her, that I hadn't thought about it in a bigger picture way. Most of our disagreements, and this was interesting when I flash back on that, because I thought about it for prepping this episode, but this conversation has stuck with me for years, because I agreed with her. When she said that, I was like, no, you're right. That's, everything she said, I thought was true. My reactions to things a lot of times were more like individual psychological. So for me, a lot of times I'd be like, I don't have any judgments about anyone. I'm a very non-judgmental person. If someone was working in, if they were doing sex work, I know people who work as dominatrixes. I don't have any judgment about any of these things. I'm such a non-judgmental person. Right. I a lot of times come from that space, and she was thinking about it more from, I might say, like a sociological perspective, or like a big picture societal perspective. And I was like, no, you're right. That's for sure. And I agreed, and we had the conversation about this, where I was like, yeah, you're not wrong. It's a big question of like people who are doing this because they're financially desperate, people who are doing this because they have substance abuse problems, people who are doing this because of even horrible things like sex trafficking. And, this whole set of questions, I was like, I agreed with everything. It was almost like we just came for things sometimes from different angles or something like that, but it wasn't like I disagreed at all. But she still would be mad at me. Even if I agreed, she'd probably still be mad at me. So anyways, that's how it was. And I thought, well, that's interesting, and that conversation always sort of stuck with me, over all of these years, where I basically kind of agreed. And I think it probably goes back to something in Buddhist thought. The main thing about the way I think of Buddhist thought around this, tantric Buddhist thought and Buddhist thought in general, would be that the main thing is like, don't abuse your sexuality. That's like a major question, right? How do you not abuse your sexuality, or how do you not make your sexuality abusive of others? It would be another way maybe of framing that. How do you make it so that you don't use your sexuality as a thing that causes harm to other people? And I think in this sense, I agreed, So I think probably part of my reluctance to talk about this story on the podcast went back to this conversation, where I was like, yeah, it's a definite thing. A lot of women are pushed into situations where they're doing this kind of work from places of like desperation, right? For whatever, or like maybe not even choice, And when I was talking with my patient about this, and it was interesting because she'd worked as like a waitress in a strip club at one point in her life, like back in her 20s. And we were, had a conversation about this. I mean, just yesterday. And it was interesting to talk with her about, because she came from all those places too. On the one hand, she was talking about, working in, and this is a place, I guess maybe on Mannheim Road in Chicago. So not like maybe a seedier part of the city. Yeah, than certainly where you and I were, right? And she was really talking about, on the one hand, these women from Russia who knows how they got there, right? And probably were being forced into some kind of sex work, right? And probably were, maybe being coerced into prostitution besides just doing sort of the strip kind of stuff, right? And, people who had substance abuse problems. And then she also kind of talked in an interesting way, because she talked for maybe like 5 minutes or something, 5-10 minutes once the conversation started. And she said that she also felt a lot of like pity for some of these men who came in, who were just so desperate for some kind of facsimile of virtual human contact, virtual human female contact, that they were just paying out money that they probably didn't even have, just to have some kind of semblance of some feeling of feeling connected to another person. All those things she brought up. And I was like, yeah, I could see really all of that, But I suppose underneath it, that was part of my like, a little bit of reluctance to talk about this story, because that has always been in my mind, around all of these issues, my whole life. But certainly, like, whenever I think about this, I think back to this conversation. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say there, Daniel?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it just depends on if that conversation never happened, how would it be different for you? I mean,
it probably would be the same, but it comes back to that as being a very memorable conversation, because it was with a very important person in my life who was making a strong point about it.
Right, but that's the point, is that it was brought to your attention.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't like, once she said it that way, I agreed with everything she said. It wasn't even an argument. There wasn't. I think I answered kind of in like an off the cuff kind of a way, But she was like, no, you got to think of this bigger picture thing. And I was like, no, you're absolutely right. It wasn't even an argument.
Right. No, I'm not saying it was. I was saying, but the context to which that she delivered it to you was in a very particular kind of way, because it was with the romantic partner, and it was done in a kind of a way that would cater to your understanding.
I don't know if it caters my understanding that great, because she just got pissed off at me.
Oh, well.
Yeah, she was a tough bikini.
But she
was observant. A little bit on the ferocious side.
But you're observant, and so if someone's going to call you on something that you might not have thought of, you're going to go, oh, wait a minute, let me think about that, as opposed to being, triggered.
The only thing I'd like maybe griping about is just like, it wasn't stuff I hadn't thought of. It was stuff that I felt anyways. She was just more going like, well, you answered this kind of like a little bit too flippantly, given the big picture context. And I was like, yeah. I think the other part of this, and this goes back to like, I think the sex positivity part for me too. I think the reason that happened was there's a part of me that's just like a curious person. Not like a curious person in that I'm odd, but that's probably true. But a curious person in that, like, I just want to experience things. So I think that my instant reaction was just like, meh, that could be like an interesting experience, I suppose. It was probably the place I came from, in answering in the way that I did, and I've been thinking about that, in regards to this subject matter. And I think things about like sex positivity and just exploring the world in a tantric way, because there is this thing of like, if I look at my own, karmic tendencies, there's obviously a part of me that's like, yeah, I'm a curious person. I don't think I would have done Zen if I wasn't curious. Part of doing Zen was like, I wonder what this stuff is. I'm curious. Or doing any of the stuff I did was probably curious. Why do you like stick needles in people? Because you're curious. Curious what's going to happen. Yeah. Why do you take some weird combination of plants? Because you're curious what's going to happen. That's just part of who I am. Yeah. And I think that is like part of maybe what you might call like a tantric personality, is a curiosity thing. Sometimes they say the tantras are for passionate people. Sure. I think it's true.
And curiosity is a passion.
Like curiosity is part of that. Yeah.
Passion for seeing, for outcome.
Yeah, for experience, right?
Yeah.
And like I feel that like really strongly, and I feel like that's kind of a deep part of my spiritual core too. This desire to have experience and to learn. There's I got it from the Dalai Lama, actually, not like hanging around personally, but in a big group, the Dalai Lama does this tantra called the Kala Chakra Tantra and Wheel of Time. And when you look at the astrology in it, like my astrology is kind of people who are curious in that. So yeah, I could see both sides of that. It was sort of an interesting thing remembering back to this, like kind of prepping this up to talk about, because I was like, yeah. Like her point is true, and my instant reaction was just one of like curiosity, which again has to be tempered by like a thought about the big picture too. Sure. But anyway, so that was, I think, the reason why I was like, that was the reason why I wanted to do this thing in the first place, because they talk about the tantras, go to some place and see what happens. Right. See if something curious doesn't happen. Right. Maybe something curious will happen, but that's not like not understanding the context of what she was talking about too. Mm-hmm. That there's this like total thing of like desperation around this, and it's a kind of a weird kind of two things to hold in one's mind, I suppose, right? I know it's interesting, but for me it was like it was probably just the thing of wanting to do this for reals, to want to make the tantra real, not just to have it be some theoretical thing that sits on the shelf, and also probably something in me that I like to learn, and I like to like see what experiences are like, especially ones where I'm like a fish out of water and a little bit uncomfortable, right? I want to do that on some level. So it's kind of like, but again, like I think my point of concern would be like that's never not recognizing what she was pointing out too, right? Which is probably why I'd never been to those places in the first place. Correct. I don't go to those places because I don't want to be in environments where sexuality is being treated shittily. Mm-hmm.
Well, and contributing in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I've never been one of these kind of guys myself. The only times I've really been have been for like bachelor parties or something like this, where you're going to hang out with whomever, and then you go there. Now I have friends and family members who have worked at places, mm-hmm. like very frequently go to these places because it's an opportunity for them to, I don't know, experience whatever they're trying to experience.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because I don't have judgment about it at the same time. It's a strange place to be in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have judgments about individual people either, because I know people who work,
yes,
in sex work, and I'm like, I don't have any judgment against you at all.
No, it's a weird spot in like being compassionate for those who probably have some negative influences, from their life and traumas of various types, but then also being okay with someone's choices to do that, and saying, okay, I'm not going to shame you, or be weird with you in any kind of way, because that's what you're choosing to do at this time. So, yeah,
it's kind of like different parts of my personality. There's a psychological part of me that's like, I understand why some of this stuff happens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even if it isn't great, I understand it. At the same time, there's also the part that's like, well, I mean, I don't like situations where women are going to be treated badly and abused. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I suppose like it's the same thing. I think the only other time I really was around anything like that in my life was like bachelor party, only one, and it was pretty like, you're like, this is just uncomfortable. Yeah, like I'm not into this. This is totally uncomfortable. No, for some dude. I think in Chicago the company was called like Grin and Bear It. My one friend arranged it for this other guy we know, and then later on his soon-to-be wife was really mad about the whole thing, and ended up in a big brouhaha, and I was like, oh my god, I'm like, just like the whole thing was just stupid. But being in the situation, there's some guy who's kind of like the security person to make sure the dudes don't act all crazy, act the fool, right? And the lady's dancing around, and it's just perfectly beautiful woman, and I thought, oh, this is just so mortifying. I said, oh, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah,
people hooting and hollering, it's just not my thing. But anyway, so that led to this experience where the point was to go to place something in a tantric way, to go someplace that like was charged with a kind of a sexual energy. And certainly for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to be like a total fish out of water person here. So I was like, okay, I'll get Daniel, my tantric buddy, and we'll go down there and we'll see if we can see what happens.
Yeah, I'll bring Daniel.
Well, no, you want to go with a little like
you want to roll
with someone that you trust. I thought, well,
Yeah,
he'll get this thing. If I told somebody else, they won't even get why the fuck I want to do this.
Well, I
told some other friend, like, okay, I'm going on a tantric thing. I got to go to this place and see if something happens. They look at me like, what are you talking about? You know? So anyways.
I think the other part that's cool though is to intentionally do something you've never done before, you know, and it sort of causes you or people to act out of instinct in different times, you know, and you see where you are, you see who you are, because there's no familiarity at all for these things. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to act. You're like, do I shake your hand? Or I don't know what, you know, how does this work? Like, what am I, you know?
Yeah. Well, I have no idea what the social context for this is.
You have no clue.
I had no clue.
So but those are huge learning opportunities, actually.
Yeah, no, it was like from that point of view, like, again, that's a psychological stance, right? That's curiosity and just looking from the point of view. I think going back to like the theme of sex positivity, which, you know, it's going to be something that we're going to talk about over and over again, probably in future episodes.
Yeah,
there is something about like, you know, pushing yourself and trying something that maybe you wouldn't otherwise do. And, you know, like one of the most positive things I heard about that was that, you know, if you do something and you don't like it, you found out something about yourself. You learned something about yourself. Right. It's not your thing.
Right.
Yeah. You went to this place and you did this thing and you realized it wasn't for you. And that's the, you know, and there's that's okay. You know, that's okay to find out that information about yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I know, man. There's a whole other topic to this that like, we're not going to go into because we only have a few minutes. You know, we
should probably do it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a couple of friends who do stuff on OnlyFans or OnlyFans, whatever.
What's that?
You know, are you never heard of this before?
No, I never heard of it.
Oh, okay, Eric, sorry. So OnlyFans is a website where you can upload video live or recorded, and people can pay you live for doing things. And it's supposed to be.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's sort of like you do it's sort of like part of the porn industry or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's kind of decentralized, the porn industry, actually, because they're just people. You know, they're attractive.
Yeah.
But, you know, so there's a friend of mine who has friends.
Dude, I don't, like, again, that's one of those things. I don't have any judgments about that.
I'm not judging. She makes a shitload of money.
Yeah, but like you could, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I go back to my first love, what would she think about that?
Right. No, but that's what I'm saying. I
don't know. She might find that to be toxic. And I can't totally disagree with it.
Right. But so that's what I'm saying. This is another little like side thing, as like, okay, someone is doing this thing. They're choosing to do that. What? Yeah,
because there's a woman who feels comfortable with that. I'm not gonna have a judgment about it. But again, I don't know if I flash back to my 20s and I was talking with, you know, this person I was super close with, she might go full on and just say, no, that's a toxic thing. You shouldn't do that kind of stuff.
Sure. And that's totally.
And she's not wrong.
No.
And she's not wrong. It's a crazy thing. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, we live in a place where that can be done for now. And people have the opportunity to choose, you know?
Yes, I know where you're going with this.
So we'll leave it at that.
That'll be picked up in the future episode. We were talking about that.
Anyways,
the memories of this. Choice is a positive thing.
Choice is a positive thing, because choice is truly freedom, right? And your decision the responsibility from your decisions is yours. But if you have the opportunity to make them, then you're at least you have that part of your free will to be in contact. You know,
and we're doing a spirituality and religious kind of a podcast in a way, certainly a spiritual podcast. And you should be able to determine your own spirituality and your own attitude towards what religion is and what you should believe or not believe. That's up to you to decide.
Yeah.
Anyways, the memories of the event, as we're getting to the end of this episode, I should do it real quick so I can just tell how this seemed to me. So, yeah, we went down there, and again, like for me, total fish out of water. I have no idea what the heck this is. And so, you know, I'm kind of there. And the big tantric thing would be like, again, this idea, like, see if something interesting happens, right? See if something curious happens. And I think why the evening is memorable to me is because, like, if nothing interesting happened, there wouldn't be a story.
Right.
But something sort of interesting did happen, where, you know, you're kind of there, you're sitting, and I think one woman approached us first, and she was really beautiful, and, you know, fine. But what really happened was this other lady came up, and it was just one of those things where she was like the perfect person to get even what the heck we were doing there.
Yeah, because
we told her.
We told her.
And she was like, oh, that's cool.
Yes.
And she liked it. And then you said something. I remember this conversation, like a psych person. So sometimes details of conversations will stick with me. I was talking with a friend about this recently. And you said something like, well, we're here to study. And you referenced to me and you said, like, we're here to study. This guy knows the ancient secrets of China or something. You were kind of fucking around, but you were being nice. And she was like, I want to know the ancient secrets of China. We were kicking the shit, and the ancient secrets of China and shamanism. We were talking about all this stuff, and like she totally got it, and it's like sparked this really kind of amazing conversation. And I can remember like instances of it. She was, working at this. She also was training to be a psychic, and working in this psychic sort of, I guess,
training program,
training, but also like doing readings.
Yeah.
I had a weird like thing afterwards. I was like, I wonder if that was real. So I did look up the site and she was on there doing readings. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and so we were just like chatting back and forth about that. She was talking a lot about what India was talking about actually. And I guess what Anya will probably be talking about in the future with this, that she saw sexuality as a healing thing.
Yes.
Right. And she was talking about how to do that. And she was, even from what Lady India was talking about, also talking about the subdom aspect of it and how that can be healing. Lady India's point was something like, if you've had trauma, to go into a place where you play in those experiences of power and having to yield and, playing around that, but in a safe way with someone you trust, it can almost be a healing thing, especially when you've been coerced and been in situations where you've been victims of sexual violence. And she was pretty much talking a similar kind of a thing, and I think she said her long-term goal was to be involved in that somehow. But she was like very interested in energy work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she was like, it was funny because she was going under the name Rose. I don't know if you remember this.
Of course I remember.
Oh, you remember it. She was going under the name Rose, and there's this really great little bit of like tantric verse from this tantra called The Secret Assembly, which goes something like, it's King Indrabhuti who's talking to the Buddha about what he's looking for in Buddhism. Bigger backstory, but I'll just tell the short version. I think we've talked about it different times in the podcast. But she was like, oh, so there's the name, the word rose is in the thing. And she was like, oh, so there's a verse with my name in it. And I was like, yeah. And it goes something like, in this rose garden so delightful to experience, even if in my next life I would have to come back as a fox, an enlightenment that disavows the sense pleasures and sex pleasures, but sense pleasures I would never desire, O Gautama Buddha, something like that, and we were talking about that verse and what it means. So the point was, it was just like this, like, I think for me, why the evening stuck was the Tantra say, go to this place and see if something weird doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And something odd happened. It was curious to like find like the perfect person who you could almost say was like the Kini goddess there to like be able to understand even what the whole project was about.
Yeah. And like we said in the previous episode, we spent, a good 45, 50 minutes together talking, just
chatting. Yeah.
I
couldn't help. Yeah.
It was good. It was a worthwhile experience. I mean, I never forgot it. You never forgot it. It's still in my mind.
Stuck with me. And there's things in, there's one of the tantras in particular where there's talk about like, look at women as being, emanations of the divine feminine.
Yes.
And it's interesting because they give a long list. I might do like a shot of spirit on it if we don't talk about it here, or maybe we'll do an episode, but they just talk about all the different roles that women take on in society. And some of them is a sex worker, but some of them are, mothers and teachers and artists and poets. And it just goes on and on with this long list. And it says, like, when you see any woman in any of those roles, always remember that she's an emanation of me, the divine feminine force in the world. And I was like, yeah, like you had that, like it had that vibe to it, in this interesting way. So I was like, it's a cool experience in memory in that, the Tantra say, try this and see if something weird doesn't happen, and something did. And even I think when it got to the point, and this was, I just want to say this because you and I never really talked about this, but even when it got to the point of like the dance, did I really feel like I needed it? Not really.
No,
I didn't care. But, she was like, eventually she's like, well, do you want me to dance for you? And we were like, okay. And it was interesting because when she was doing doing her thing, doing the dance, it was interesting because she leaned in and she said something very smart person. She leaned in and she said, like, you've never been in any of these places in your life, have you? And I was like, no, I don't know what any of this is. So she leaned in and she said that to me, and she was like, and then she like took my hands, actually, like she grabbed my hands, and she was doing like a little bit of her like psychic energy work kind of stuff or something. I mean, there was just a lot of like, I'm an acupuncturist, I can feel energy flow going between people, and I was like, well, she's doing something. There's a lot of this energy flopping back and forth, and it was a lot of it, and it was very like it was very nicely done. You know, it's very nicely done. I thought she's really making a connection, or she's trying to. Yeah, that's it. She's trying to make some kind of a connection. She's trying to do something, recognizing that, again, that what we were talking before, this fish out of water feeling, and like, and just, I really didn't care on some level, but also like she did this thing to make it real, to try to make something authentic happen. And she did that by kind of taking my hands, and like I could feel, like, and it didn't matter even what she was doing in her body at that point, because I could kind of feel her hands, beyond that. And then at the end she went, woo, and she kind of backed off like, oh, that was a lot of energy. And I was like, yeah, that was very cool, So, that was kind of the experience. And then, of course, we, you paid her for the dance and whatever. And actually, I really felt that she had done a cool thing. So I think I just paid her twice or something. I was like, this is cool. You did a really good thing. You spent time with us, and this was a good experience. Anyways, so that's it. So that's an episode.
That is an episode.
I wanted to talk about it. I think what it says is like, I think what we're going to continue on with this discussion of openness and positivity. But I suppose the idea is, some of this is things you have to be conscious of in terms of sexuality, and kind of like what my first love was saying. Part of it has to do with being open to new experiences. Part of it has to do with being curious and open in ways that are respectful. It's an interesting subject matter. So
yeah, I agree.
I've got the chance to talk about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got it. We got it out. We got the public service announcements.
Yeah. Oh, you got to do your thing at the end.
Yeah, for sure. As always, Eric, thank you so much for being a part. For our audience here who is listening to us, thank you for listening. Please feel free to share it with anybody and everybody in particular. If you're watching us on video, you're either seeing this on YouTube or you're watching this through Spotify, and we definitely appreciate the feedback. So please feel free to hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Instagram at Gin and Tantra. Website will be coming soon, so we'll be able to take some feedback from folks if they want to leave us some positive messages. That would certainly be nice, messages to put in our stockings for early July Christmas, and feel nice. Anyways, we do appreciate our audience, whether you're listening or watching. We've been doing this now for 2 years, actually, Eric.
Oh, is it that long?
It's been a long run, and we definitely love to have interactions with people. It fuels us to continue to have considerate and spiritual conversations. So
I learned a lot from doing this.
Always. So for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.
I want you to get together. I want you to put your hands together one time. I want you to get together. I want you to get together.